Okay, this week, last chapter, chapter 13, and we're going to talk about death. I know this isn't anybody's favorite subject. As a matter of fact, if you are Dene, then you probably are supposed to stay away from this topic. But unfortunately, as psychologists, one of the things that we need to deal with is is death. Or the worry about death. If you go into psychology and you become a counselor, everybody, I, you may think, well, geez, I'm only going to be on the reservation. But even if you're just working on the reservation, that doesn't mean everybody that you talk to is going to be traditional Dene. Doesn't mean that. You're going to be dealing with a lot of different people, and that's one of the things I think you need to remember is the fact that uh, as a counselor, you need to help the people with their problem from their point of view. And so, if their point of view isn't as traditional as yours, then you've got to deal with their problem from their point of view. I was talking to a student the other day, and he was saying that he has a relative who's married to a Paiute, and unfortunately, this individual passed away, and the family, of course, were going to take care of the situation because his family is going to take care of it, and her family, the wife's family, came down and said, "No, we need to do it our way because they have traditions just like the Dene have, and the question is, who wins out? And the answer is it's the wife, because the wife has um, legal rights that go beyond just about anything else. She inherits everything, and she's the one that has to make the decisions. And since she was she's from a Plains tribe, and they are most of them are patrilineal. They're not matrilineal since they're Plains tribes. Their customs were completely different. Um, uh, I was working on the Fort Belknap reservation, and I can tell you that most of the people up there are Catholic, but I can tell you that even their native traditions aren't anything like they are down here, as far as the Dene are concerned. So, uh, depending on who you're dealing with and dealing with the dynamic of the family, you're going to have to deal with death, and you may have to forego your own ideas about how these things are supposed to take place. The one taboo you can probably stay with is probably the taboo against touching dead the dead body. Other tribes. One of the things you're supposed to do is make a gesture toward the person that has died, and that very often means touching. Anyway, okay, so the one thing I want you to understand is, and of course, I debated as to how I was going to cover this chapter. I've covered it before. I've covered it before in at Dene College, and I've always come up with the conclusion that we need to talk about it. We need to deal with it. Because pretending that it doesn't exist, or pretending that everybody is a healer or a roadman, and uh, everybody has the same ideas, it's just not real. Everybody is surprised if they deal with. Okay, let me explain something to you. I worked in medicine for 30 years, and well, when we were out in California, I couldn't find a job, so I worked in a cemetery. I couldn't find a job, and then I'd say I worked in a cemetery. I was working for the Veterans Association, the Veterans Affairs. and I was working in a national cemetery. And I can tell you, working in medicine, you see a lot of different customs. And as far as death is concerned, you really need to honor everyone's ideas. Because everybody has different ideas. All the different denominations of Protestantism, Catholics do it one way, Protestants do it another way. Methodists do it one way, and Baptists do it another way, and everybody has their own customs, and we're going to talk about that at the end of the chapter. But primarily, we're going to go through some of the statistics. But it's and I apologize if this offends you or if this makes you uncomfortable. Fine, but one of the things that you need to understand is that when somebody dies, somebody has to take care of the situation, and different religions do it in a different way. As recently as the turn of the 20th century, 50 out of every 1,000 people in the United States died every year. That's a lot of dead people. That's a lot of people dying. Life expectancy, of course, was in the 40s, maybe in the 50s somewhere. But as I told you, in 1949, the life expectancy was 59 years old. In Europe, during plagues and natural disasters, as many as 40% of a population might die. There are estimates that when Europeans first came to the Americas, there may have been as many as 100,000 people here. Of course, there aren't 100,000. I'm sorry, 100 million, 100 million indigenous people in the three Americas, Central, South, and North America, but they're all gone. Well, a lot of them died. There's a story about when they first landed around Plymouth Rock. The place was so crowded that the Europeans decided that they couldn't land there. They couldn't. There was just no room for them. There were just too many indigenous people. And when in 1620, when the Pilgrims, whoever those people were, they weren't really called Pilgrims, of course. But when they landed there, there was nobody left. People had died of diseases. They have estimated that as many as 90 to 99% of the indigenous peoples of the Americas died from diseases brought over by Europeans. And of course, Europeans, that's a great way to, they carried a lot of germs, immunity. If we ever came in contact with somebody who had a different, it's when people go down to Mexico, a lot of times they come back with what they call Montezuma's revenge. Montezuma's revenge is dysentery. People in Mexico, it doesn't bother them, but people from the United States go down there and they come back with dysentery. Now, how in the world does that happen? Well, that happens because they have an immunity against dysentery, and people from the United States don't, because we don't run into it like they do. And of course, this is just the way the world works. If you come in contact with something, then you get immunity to it. This is one of the reasons why COVID is so devastating to people, because this is new. This is a novel coronavirus. It's one that they say that we've never seen before, but I have a feeling it's similar to a coronavirus that we saw back in the 80s. But I mean, how many people have immunity from that encounter? The encounter was in Germany. Anyway, so this is the way it works. A lot of people die, and as the PowerPoint says, 40% of the population may have died during natural disasters and plagues in Europe. 1/3 of all babies died in infancy. This is one of the reasons why there were a lot of people that had babies, but there weren't that many people that survived. 50% of children died before their 10th birthday. So you've got 1/3 of your population is dying in infancy. You've got 50% of your population that don't make it to their 10th birthday. That's so if you have 6 kids, potentially 3 of them will survive. Death was normal and it was expected. Kids died of natural childhood diseases. They died of measles, mumps, chickenpox. They died of all those things. They died of smallpox. They died of whooping cough. All of these diseases were around, and people died from them. Of course, now we vaccinate children against these diseases, and we don't have as many people dying. So when did all this take place? Well, initially, we developed all these vaccines in the 50s and the 60s. So the turning point seemed to have been right around the end of the 1960s. My daughter was born in 1969, and she was vaccinated against everything but chickenpox. Chickenpox, she had a smallpox vaccination, and my son, when he was born in 1972, did not. And of course, by that time, we had just about eradicated smallpox. It's still not out there. It did exist before that. I've been vaccinated against smallpox 5 or 6 times myself. Once when I was in the first grade, and then I was vaccinated against smallpox when I started college. I was vaccinated when I got into the military, and every time I went overseas, they vaccinated me. So I've been vaccinated about 5 times against smallpox. Now, the first time I have a pretty big scar from the smallpox vaccination, but the rest of my vaccinations you can barely see. During the 20th century, advances in medicine from surgical techniques to antibiotics reduced death rates and increased life expectancies all over the world. Death rates have now fallen to 9%, and infant mortality is below 1% in the United States. Children rarely succumb to childhood illnesses. Adults most often live to retire, and older individuals now are given the medicines to fight off formerly fatal illnesses. Like pneumonia, we can fight off pneumonia. And we're going to see a graph in just a minute where it shows that in 1900, the number one killer was pneumonia. And hardly anybody dies of pneumonia anymore. The first generation to reach adulthood with only 5% of the population ever experiencing death in their presence was the baby boom generation, children born between 1946 and 1964. Only 1 in 3 people died at home. People rarely thought of their own deaths. Today, however, death tends to be getting closer to people as violence, drug abuse, COVID-19, and AIDS becomes more prevalent. There seems to be mass shootings in the United States over the last couple of weeks. Just weird. Why in the world are we seeing this? I'm not exactly sure what the answer is. There are at least 3 aspects of death. We're going to talk about this throughout the chapter. The biological definition of death is when the bodily functions cease, when your heart stops beating, when you stop breathing, and when your brain stops. There are no more electrical impulses in your brain. And that's called a flat line, if we can read it. Well, there's also a social aspect of death, the basic social attitudes toward death, and that's more toward the back of the end of the chapter, and psychological, both of dying and they're bereaved. And of course, we're going to talk about all 3 of those aspects of death. Before modern medicine allowed physicians to maintain a dying patient indefinitely, biological death took place when the heart stopped beating and respiration ceased. The brain was starved for oxygen and all living functions stopped. Now that we have the capability of breathing for an individual and maintaining a heartbeat indefinitely, life support can be maintained indefinitely despite the fact that the brain has no awareness. Now, this is maybe kind of macabre, but when I worked at St. Joseph Hospital in Omaha, our job was to, if somebody came in and they were an organ donor, what we would do, we would put them on life support, and we would maintain them until we could harvest their organs. If they were declared dead, we would maintain them so that all of the organs would be fresh, and then we would take the organ that they were donating, and when we were done, we'd take them off life support, and of course, we didn't have them on life support that long. It sounds kind of horrible, but the reality is, we saved people with the kidneys that we harvested. We saved people with the hearts that we harvested. We saved people with the lungs, corneas. We planted corneas, transplanted livers, and all of that stuff needs to be maintained. You've got to take it someplace. So we transplanted people right there in Omaha, but sometimes it'd have to go out. It'd have to go to Kansas City, or it'd have to go to Chicago, or you'd have to fly it out someplace. So the fresher it was when you took it out, the more likely that it would be a good transplant. I know this sounds god awful, doesn't it? But that was our job. So we maintained them in ICU. It's not like we had we just left them there for days and days and days. That's not the way it works. Normally, there's a list. People get put on a list, and there's always two people that are assigned to that organ. So let's say you've got a heart. If you've got, what you do is whoever's next on the list, that's the person that you try to send the heart to. But if you can't get everything arranged, and of course this has to happen within minutes, within an hour, if you can't get everything arranged to transplant that individual, or if the individual is too sick to receive the transplant, like in San Francisco or Seattle or I don't know, in Minneapolis, whatever. Then there's somebody local that you can wait for a little bit longer, and so the person that is a little bit closer to you, it's like in concentric circles, and whether you can find a flight to wherever you're going to. Transplants take place in major hospitals, so they're in Houston and Dallas and Oklahoma City, and there's. Okay, anyway, I don't know why in the world I'm talking about this, but anyway, we were a hospital that was our job. We did transplant at our hospital, but there was two hospitals down the street, literally down the street, within 2 or 3 blocks of us, that did transplant. One of them was Nebraska Health Center, Nebraska University Health Center, and the other was Clarkson in Omaha. Because of our ability to maintain people indefinitely, the AMA developed new definitions for death, and really we can, even if somebody's brain dead, if we have to breathe for them, we have to force their heart to beat, we can maintain them for an extended length of time. Of course, we didn't do that. Of course. There's people on these lists, and we would harvest all the organs as quickly as we possibly could. Usually, the family wants to move on, and they want to bury the person as quickly as they possibly can, or at least they want to get them going. So it's not like we're going to hold on to them for a couple weeks. That's not the way it works. Normally. Normally we get the organs out fairly quickly. Because, so we talked about this before. Irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory function is one definition of death. Irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain, including the brain stem, and that is the new definition. AMA is the American Medical Association. However, people can live for an extended period of time with only their brainstem functioning, a state referred to as persistent vegetative state. And of course, if you've read anything about trying to declare somebody dead, the reality is, as long as our brainstem is still functioning, that we can keep them going for an extended length of time, for years, literally for years. Social aspects of death and dying. Many social aspects of death and dying are governed by religious or legal prescriptions that tend to reflect a society's attitude toward death. Embalming is a social custom that has become a law in most states. In most states, you can't just bury somebody on your property. Can't dig a hole in the backyard and bury somebody there. It has to be. It all depends on the state, of course, as to how that works. The Jewish practice of standing watch or shomer over the deceased until they are buried is also a social custom. So most religions, most major religions, have their own way of looking at these things. And of course, if you live in a community with a large Jewish population, you need to understand that that population has their own way of dealing with death. I was surprised. I grew up in Indiana, which is primarily a Protestant state, but I lived in a Methodist town. So all of the burial customs that I knew, that I grew up with, were Methodist, were from that church. And of course, Methodists do it one way, and Lutherans do it another way, and Presbyterians do it a totally different way. But there were Catholics in our area, but very few Jewish people. Psychological aspects of death. Psychologists feel that people use rituals surrounding death to give themselves something to do when someone dies, instead of feeling hopeless. Some rituals allow for extended contact with the dying or dead and reaffirm the strength and efficacy of the community. In the Jewish community, friends and relatives gather at the deathbed to lend support to the dying. This is vidui or shema. In the Jewish community, when a friend or relative dies and someone hears of their death, they ritually tear an article of clothing that they will wear for the rest of the day, and this is known as keriah. And so if you're in a Jewish community and you see somebody with torn clothing, then you don't go up to them and ask, hey, you need to borrow my coat. You don't want to do that. Also, you don't want to ask them who died. That's not something that you would want to do. After the funeral, a group of male relatives, at least 7 of them, will gather and share and vent feelings of the deceased. This is known as sitting Shiva, and I've sat Shiva before. I've had friends who were Jewish, and I was asked, because they didn't have enough Jewish men to sit Shiva, I was asked to sit Shiva. All of these rituals help the bereaved confront the reality of death. The study of death is called thanatology. Many people believe that people must not only learn to deal with the death of someone close to themselves, but also their own death as well. And this is known as death education. Hospice care is care given to someone in a controlled setting, but outside the hospital. Some hospice care is provided in spatial housing where medical care is available. Other hospice care is at home by medical professionals. When my mother-in-law was dying, she came to live with us, and they sent people over. This is in Mississippi. We were stationed in Mississippi at the time, and she came to live with us. And they sent hospice care around 2 or 3 times a week, and they would check on her, and they would bathe her, and it was a service they had. And then they told us the day she died, they told us that she was drifting away. They could tell because the circulation in her feet was so poor, and they were right that she died that day. Anyway, it was really nice, and they actually sent. They prepared. They called. They called the funeral home and told them that they needed to be aware that my mother-in-law would probably pass away that day. Throughout most of the 20th century, medicine allowed people to get farther and farther from death. People died in a hospital away from all but their closest relatives. And of course, that's what's happening now with HIV, well, not with HIV, with COVID. But the AIDS epidemic in the early 80s changed all that as more and more people contracted the nearly always fatal disease and expired slowly. The process of slowly declining to death is referred to as a death trajectory. And of course, sometimes we know they're going to go. Something like pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer is like 95% fatal if you get pancreatic cancer. So when somebody gets it, we always put them on a death trajectory. There's a lot of anytime there's a metastasized cancer, the probability of death just increases markedly. So these are all things that we need to think about. AIDS epidemic changed a lot of things. People were hanging on for a year, 2 years with AIDS before they died. This is all stuff that I lived through. I was working in medicine in the 80s. I was working in medicine before the 80s. So I watched the transition from pre-AIDS to post-AIDS. We used to never wear gloves. We just, if we did something, if we were drawing blood, we draw blood barehanded. And now, of course, you don't do that. You wear masks. In the old days, we just drew blood. And sometimes we would get blood on us from working with patients, especially in the emergency room, and we didn't think a thing about it because, well, the only disease there were a bunch of diseases you could contract, but they were relatively rare. Hepatitis and syphilis were the only two that we worried about. But then AIDS came around, and AIDS was deadly, and if you got it, the probability of surviving with it wasn't very high. So everybody got really spooked in the medical community because of AIDS. Lingering pattern of dying. The individual is expected to die but clings to death. This is one of the death trajectories. Clings to life longer than expected. And of course, a lot of times that's what happens with people with HIV. Short reprieve pattern. The person's death is postponed unexpectedly. Sometimes cancers will go into remission. It's just eating you up, and then all of a sudden it just stops. But of course, a lot of times the reprieve tends to be short-lived. You were on a trajectory of death. There's a book called The Fault in Our Stars, and it's about two people that are dying of cancer, two teenagers in their relationship. Abrupt surprise pattern. The individual is expected to recover but unexpectedly dies. And we see that all the time. They're not that bad off, but something happens. A lot of times they'll have a heart attack, or they'll have a heart attack because of the treatment or whatever, and they won't make it. Suspended sentence pattern. The person was in the hospital to die but is suddenly discharged from medical care because the crisis has passed. Re-entry pattern. The person steadily declines but is able to remain home between periods of hospitalization. And that's usually the way it works with cancers. Terminally ill will often pass through three phases. The acute phase is a crisis that causes high stress and increasing awareness of the inevitability of death. COVID-19 is this way. If you're in the crisis, the acute stage, then then potentially they'll go into the hospital and you won't see them again. The chronic phase is an adjustment period when the individual resolves their feelings toward their own demise, and the terminal phase is where the individual withdraws from others and disengages from the world, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. When the individual enters the terminal phase of the death process, often you will notice a marked accelerated cognitive degeneration. This is called terminal drop or terminal decline, when the focus tends to be inward and the individual stops eating or drinking, or at least has to be reminded to eat and drink, because they're not worried about the reason you eat is for the energy, and the reason you drink is because you need to hydrate. But when you're dying like that, one of the things that happens is you'll forget to eat or drink. It's not really that important because that's thinking into the future. To eat and drink, I need energy to do something, or I need to drink because otherwise I'll get dehydrated and I won't be able to go to sleep tonight. That's not the way uh, people that are dying, they're thinking about just hanging on this minute. Top 10 causes of death in 1900, as you can see, number one was pneumonia. About 12% of the deaths were due to pneumonia. If you had cancer, you probably died of pneumonia before the cancer got to you. Number two is tuberculosis. Of course, we've just about eradicated tuberculosis. 11% of the deaths were due to tuberculosis. Diarrhea and enteritis. This is the number one killer of children around the world. But once upon a time, 8% of all deaths were due to diarrhea and enteritis. Heart disease, same level. So 3 and 4 were well, not exactly the same. But heart disease is about 8% of the deaths. Chronic nephritis, Bright's disease. This is a kidney disease. People died of their kidney failure, in essence. That was about 5% of all deaths. Unintentional injury, accidents, about 4%. Strokes, about 4%. Diseases of early infancy, about 4%. Cancers, about 4%. And diphtheria, about 2%. So you can see cancer is way, way down here. And the reason is because we didn't live as long in 1900 as we do today. And now, of course, we live long enough to get Alzheimer's disease, and we live long enough to get cancer. For some reason, I was fascinated with obituaries when I was growing up. I was always wondering how people died. I was real proud of my own family because my family lives into their 80s and 90s, and just about every single one of them lives into their 80s or 90s. Um, and my dad died at 90. My mom, and he had a heart condition almost all of his life, but he lived to be 90 years old. My mom lived to be 98 years old. So that's a really long time. I don't remember what I was talking about and why I was talking about it. Oh, I used to be fascinated with obituaries. A lot of people were dying of lung cancer back in the 50s and 60s. People were living to be 54, 55, 60 years old. If they made it to 60, that was a lot. And of course, people weren't retiring until they were 65, and most of them didn't make it that far. Like I said, when I was born, 1949, life expectancy was 59. Leading causes of death in the United States of people over 40. Number one is cancer, 31.5%. Why? Because our life expectancy is in the high 70s now, and we have a lot more time to develop cancers. Heart disease is number two at 21.7%. Number three is unintentional injuries, 7.6%. Poisoning, motor vehicle accidents, and falls. Diabetes is tied with strokes at 3.6%, and that is number four. People face their own death differently. In young adulthood, people tend to feel invulnerable. They maintain a personal fable. Thus, when other adolescents die, the usual reaction is it can't and won't happen to me. When I was in the military, of course, it was during Vietnam. A lot of the individuals over there were under 20 years of age. A lot of these individuals didn't think that they could be killed, and that makes for a really interesting military structure. But a lot of these people, it's not going to happen to me. It can't happen to me. They can't kill me. I'm invulnerable. And of course, these are the same kids that when they came home, they jumped in their car and drove and would drag race up and down the road. And sometimes they die because they thought they were invulnerable. Somebody else is gonna, somebody else's tire's gonna blow. Somebody else's engine's gonna blow and make them veer off the road and crash into a tree. There's one tree and they're driving down the road and their tire blows, and that blown tire takes them right into that tree. That's the only tree there is for miles and miles and miles. Talk about luck. Yeah, all kinds of crazy stuff. Well, this attitude tends to become more realistic the more responsibility the individual acquires, such as job and a family. There is still an air of invulnerability in their actions, and this probably lasts into their 40s or 50s. By the time someone reaches middle adulthood, they are usually resolved that they will someday die. These individuals begin looking at how much time they have left instead of toward the future. Uh, if I were halfway through my life right now, I'm 71 years old, then I would live to be 142. Well, nobody's lived to be 142. So the reality is I'm on the downward slope. I have to be because nobody's made it as far as 142 years. So I've got to be realistic about that. How much longer will I live? Well, maybe 20 or 30 years. It's possible. It's possible I'll go 40 more years. The federal government hopes I don't because they're paying me Social Security, and I'm sure they don't want to pay me Social Security for the next 40 years. People begin planning for retirement and accumulating money to see them through in their old age. And of course, that's Social Security. Middle-aged individuals begin working towards saving as much time in life as possible. The phrase "life is just too short" enters their vocabulary. And the reality is when you're 20 years old, you're not thinking, wow, life's just too short. You can't even imagine how much longer you have to go. But as I can tell you, as somebody 70 years old, I thought about that when I was a kid. That's one of the reasons I was looking at the obituaries, reading the obituaries every day. As people get older and move into late adulthood, they become less anxious about death. They are more likely to use emotion-focused coping strategies. With the mounting loss of friends and relatives, the individual gradually recognizes their own mortality. When I went to my high school reunion, we had lost about 20% of the individuals were no longer with us. One of my best friends in high school died of diabetes when he was 39 years old. I had another. He was my neighbor when I was growing up. He died at 29 from a heart condition. He was a blue baby. He had a heart valve problem, and he lived with that most of his life. You know, I had a good friend that died of three people out of our class committed suicide. All of them males, interestingly enough. Who else is there? Who was I thinking of? Oh, I had a really good friend that I sat with on the bus every day going to school, and he died of lung cancer. He was a big time smoker, and he died just a couple of years ago. Didn't quite make 70. So these are things that you need to think about. And these are, you lose friends and relatives. I was communicating with 4 or 5 people on Facebook, and a lot of them were giving me a hard time because of the 2016 election. They were of one party, and I was of another party, and they were giving me a really hard time. Well, almost all those people are dead now. 3 of those 4 people are dead. Many are old and infirm, but they seem to be coping with their situation. 2 out of 3 people surveyed as to whether they would trade good health to die earlier took the time alive over the good health, as interesting as that is. Approaching death, psychological changes often take place even before there are overt physiological signs of dying. Terminal drop often appears at this time. It is the acceptance of mortality, the seeming impairment of intellectual abilities, and the distancing oneself from friends and family. Terminal drop is often attributed to chronic ailments, but it is seen in people of all ages who are near death, not just the old. I used to work in a pediatrics hospital. That was really pretty painful. We were the ones, this is when leukemia was a death sentence, and we were losing about 70%, well, between 30 and 70% of kids that came down with, and these were little guys. I mean, 2 and 3 and 4 year olds. And I remember a 4 year old that went into terminal drop, and it just broke her mother's heart because the kid wouldn't pay attention to her anymore. Anyway, and that was a 4 year old, she could barely talk, and here she was rejecting her mother just before she died. And at the time I was working as a phlebotomist. I was the one that drew blood, and there were two of us, and there was one guy that was really close to this kid, had done a really good job with her, but of course she didn't get better, and she just got worse. Pretty soon she wouldn't let him draw her blood. She would only let me draw her blood. It wasn't because she liked me. It was because she didn't like me. Well, it was because she didn't care about me, and she did care about the other guy, and so she wouldn't let him draw her blood. That was kind of interesting. So this even happens with toddlers. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross from Cornell University did studies on thanatology and discovered that most people go through 5 stages before they die. When you first find out that you've got 3 months to live or whatever, you go into denial. First thing is, no, that can't be true. I've got things to do. I've got plans for the next 3 years. I'm not going to die in 6 months. That's not going to happen. So you're in denial, and then eventually you realize that they're right, because you don't feel very good, you lose energy or whatever, and then you get angry. And then after a while, you recognize the fact that your anger is not doing you any good. So the next thing that happens is you start bargaining, and this is who are you bargaining with? You're bargaining with a higher power. You're bargaining with your God. You're bargaining with the fates. It really doesn't. It really all depends on how you think. And of course, that doesn't work. You're still getting sicker and sicker and sicker, and then you go into depression. But watching thousands of people die, I can tell you that most people who die, in the end, they accept their fate. And most people die not, and I can't say they die happy. But I can say that most people die accepting what's happening to them. It's just the way it works. Thanatologists have discovered that people actually attempt to hold on to life until they reach a certain milestone date. Very often the milestone date is a birthday or an anniversary. Sometimes it's New Year's Day. I used to work I worked in the morgue, okay? Not the most pleasant place to work, but I mean, somebody's got to do it. It was always interesting, because a lot of people wanted to hold on till Christmas or New Year's. New Year's is big. So we just, the mortgages fill up on New Year's Day. Hate to work graveyard shift on New Year's Day. Most people die between 12 o'clock at night and 8 o'clock in the morning. There's a reason for that. It has to do with that's when your blood pressure is the lowest, you're asleep. So a lot of people die at that time. But birthdays big is really big. Anniversaries, a lot of times they hold on. My dad, my mom was a nurse, and she was kind of bossy, kind of mean. And my dad was feeling pretty bad, and he hadn't been in very good health for about 6 months, and finally he's in the hospital, and he asked my mom if he could go, if it's okay with her if he could go. he was scared of her, I guess. And she said, "Yeah, go ahead and die. That's okay. You don't have to hang on any longer." And he did. He died within 10 or 15 minutes of asking her that question. Religious people tend to hold on until select religious holidays. Like I said, Easter's big, uh, Christmas is big. They're trying to hold on to a certain thing. A lot of people want to hold on until their birthday. They want one more year on their tombstone. How old were you when you died? I was 97. Didn't quite make 98. That kind of stuff. But most people try to hold on until their birthdays. Thanatologists don't want to make the studying of dying too easy. They have taken words that seem to mean the same thing and given them different definitions. That's kind of a joke. Bereavement is a loss of someone to whom one feels close in the process of adjusting to it. Bereavement can affect all aspects of someone's life, including their social or community status or their roles. Grief is the emotional response experienced in the early stages of bereavement. Grief can range from anger to emptiness. Both grief and bereavement tend to be defined through cultural contexts. Okay, it seems like I'm making light of this. It's because I've been dealing with this for the last 50 years. Uh, Working in the lab, working in medicine, working in the emergency room. You've got to deal with this on a fairly frequent basis, especially in the emergency room, especially working in the morgue. We're the ones that checked in the bodies after they died, the cadavers. Somebody's got to do it. Like I said, it's nice if you can dodge this stuff, but somebody had to do it. And of course, I was in the military for 12 years. Mourning is the behavior that an individual participates in after the death of a loved one. This is very much culturally dictated. The Irish have all-night wakes where friends and family toast the memory of the deceased. I told you that Fort Bound, the Plains tribes that live up in Montana are mostly Catholic. Strangely enough, they're mostly Irish Catholic. What does that mean to say that somebody's Irish Catholic? It means that most of your priests are Irish. If they had sent German Catholics up there, or if they had sent Italian Catholics up there, then they may have different rituals. But it was mostly Irish Catholics. So it was a big deal up there everybody had a wake when somebody died. And if they were a veteran had to sit with them, with the body in the casket until they buried them. So they would die, and immediately, they'd call the family, and the family would call the local veteran association, and they would immediately send somebody over there to sit with them until they buried them. I always got the graveyard shift. That was always fun. Usually the funerals are held in the school gymnasium. I know that sounds weird. You guys don't do these kinds of things, but up there, this is a big deal when somebody dies. The whole family has to come out, and sometimes the family has to come from, Seattle, or somebody has to come up from Saley or something. So the casket will sit there, and they will have viewing, and they will have a wake for a couple days, for 2 or 3 days. And if it's, I can remember one of the first presidents of the college up there died, and his wake lasted for 3 days, and then they finally buried him. Flying a flag at half-staff is an example of mourning. In Japan, the bereaved are encouraged to maintain contact with the deceased. They cremate their dead and place the urns in family burial plots. This gets really interesting if the family is not in Japan. So you will have family members that fly in. Of course, they've already cremated them. They've already put them in the family plot, and they will go to the cemetery, and they will have a feast. They will feed the dead, as it were. Some southwestern tribes, and this is you guys, do not speak of the dead or for fear of being contaminated by their dead spirits. I'm not sure if anybody else does it besides the Dene, but maybe, I don't know if the Apache do it or not. Patterns of grief. Anticipatory grief is the feeling of anticipatory loss that people feel before someone dies. Anticipatory grief is actually adaptive in that it tends to help the individual prepare themselves psychologically and particularly for the loss of their friend or relative. So a lot of times they know that, I mean, this person has been on a death trajectory for maybe 3 or 4 or 6 or months or a year. So it's not that shocking to the family when they finally pass away. Usually it's almost a relief that their suffering is now over with. And a lot of people go, oh, how can how can you act this way when somebody dies? Well, it wasn't a surprise. My goodness, they've had cancer, terminal cancer. They stopped treatment 3 months ago, so we knew that they were going to die. And of course, we have been going through this grief process for 3 months for the year that he was under treatment or she was under treatment. We knew that this was going to happen. So no, it's not a shock. Thanatologists studying the process of grief discovered a three-stage pattern. Shock and disbelief is usually the first stage. This may last several weeks, especially if the death was unexpected. The individual feels lost and confused. They seem to be unable to believe in the death. This may actually protect them from more intense reactions. Normal physical reactions may include shortness of breath, tightness in the chest or throat, nausea, feeling of emptiness in the abdomen. All of these things are symptoms of a heart attack, or a anxiety attack, a panic attack. The numbness will eventually give way to overwhelming feelings of sadness, and that's when they cry. A lot of individuals can't cry in the beginning, and they have to go through this process before they can actually cry. Stage 2, preoccupation with the memory of the dead person. Second phase may last 6 months or more. The survivor is trying to come to terms with their loss but cannot yet accept it. Physical reactions include insomnia, frequent crying, fatigue, loss of appetite. They may relive their lives together and their entire relationship. At times, the survivor may feel that the deceased is present, even to the point of seeing their face. These episodes diminish with time, as do vivid dreams of their relationship together. Okay, let's go to stage 3. The last is resolution. The final phase arrives when the bereaved renews interest in everyday activity. Memories of the deceased now bring fond feelings mingled with sadness, but it is no longer a sharp pain and longing. They will become socially active again. This is especially important in widowers. This is men who have lost their wives, in that they tend to have a less entwined social network. As we're going to find out, women deal with death much better than men do, especially if it's a spouse. Grief therapy is counseling that can help the bereaved cope with their loss. Now, the reality is that you have a prescription for what has to happen when somebody dies. But what if this is somebody from the reservation who has lived off the reservation and is not used to dealing with death the way that you're dealing with death? What if it's somebody who's not Dene? What if it's somebody from another tribe? I had a really good friend when I was living in Montana. He was Navajo, and his wife was from up there, and he lived up there with his wife. And when she died, he left almost right away. And of course up there, they it takes them a couple of weeks to deal with somebody dying. It's not that they're grieving. It's usually that they're having a wake, and then they're having a feast, and they give things away. But of course, that wasn't his custom, and he left, and the family was kind of upset because he was dealing with it as if he were because he was a Navajo, he was dealing with it in his own way. And of course, that's not the way you do things up there, not the Plains tribes. Remember, the Plains are most of the Plains Indians are patrilineal, not matrilineal. So it was, it was a big deal, and I'm not sure. I haven't. He didn't come back. He was. There were too many bad memories as far as he was concerned. He came back down to Arizona, and nobody has heard or seen him. He had 4 daughters, but they were all grown by the time his wife died of diabetes. Anyway, there you go. Two cultures coming at loggerheads because they can't handle because they handle death differently. There are many misperceptions about death, dying, and grieving. Researchers have discovered that. Now, this is really kind of strange. Everybody thinks that you're supposed to deal with death the way that I deal with death, not the way that you deal with death. Everybody does it the same. Everybody gets depressed. It's not the way it works. Most people do not get depressed when somebody dies. They deal with it, and they're resilient, so they deal with it. Some religions do not deal with death well. The Catholics are really good at it because everybody's got a different job to do. Some Protestant religions are just horrible. You're supposed to feel bad. This is cultural. You're supposed to feel bad, and you're supposed to be depressed for a select amount of time, and you can be depressed as long as you want to be, and they just don't really deal with it very well. But the reality is, no matter how your group deals with it, 15 to 35% of grieving survivors show signs of depression. Only 15 to 35% of grieving survivors show signs of depression. When I was 18 years old, I had a twin cousin. We were born almost at the same time, and he died in an automobile accident. And we went to the funeral. My family does dying a little bit different than everybody else does. We celebrate the fact that somebody was alive. We don't get sad. But this kid's mother was, well, of course it was his mother, and his sister. They're evangelists, and they cried and they wailed through the ceremony, and here we are. We're kind of sitting around, and we're telling stories about him. He was like a wake, I guess, but we were telling funny stories about him, which is the way some people handle death, But they didn't want to do it that way. They wanted everybody to rue the fact that he died. It's just not the way we handle things. Failure to show distress at the outset does not necessarily lead to problems. In fact, the people who showed the most distress were more likely to still be troubled after 2 years. So here you're only dealing with about 15 to 35% of the people who show a really negative reaction. Now that may offend you. It certainly offended my aunt and my cousin, his sister, but the rest of us were fine. Yeah, we wish he hadn't died, but we weren't going to, sacrifice the rest of our lives wishing that Buster was still around. Not everyone needs to work through a loss or benefits from doing so. Some people who work through their grief had the most severe problems. So, it all depends. Surviving spouses, not only do women tend to live longer than men, but in the majority of marriages in the United States, the woman marries an older man. I've never married an older woman. I've always married a younger woman, so this is true of me as well. I've been married 3 times, by the way. Widows tend to be worse off economically than widowers. Widowers, of course, are males that lose their wives, and widows are women that lose their their husbands. In the United States, 40% of women over 65 are widowed. In the United States, 14% of men over 65 are widowed. Among women who are over 85, 80% are widowed. Among men over 85, only 43% are widowed and not married. The average white woman is widowed at 56, African American women at 49, the Hispanic women at 48. Okay, and my wife is 70, or will turn 70 in November. Losing a parent, half of all children become orphaned by the time they are in their mid-50s. I guess I'm orphaned. My dad died when I was 59, and my mom died when I was 65. 75% of the time that they reach their 60s, grieving for parents may last longer than for other deaths. As I said, my family deals with death a little bit differently. No grieving. It's kind of interesting, and please don't be offended. But when my dad died, of course, he had this huge funeral. My mother didn't have a funeral, okay? She didn't want one. But my dad had this big funeral, and my mom told everybody, don't you cry. If anybody cries, then you're going to be in trouble. And you know, there were 5 kids and all these grandchildren. And my mom told everybody, don't you cry. Nobody cries. And nobody did cry, except I have a brother-in-law who's Catholic. And of course, that's common practice in a Catholic funeral. When they lower the body into the grave, there, you know, that's one of the things that he was the only one that cried. My mother got mad at him. You know, the rest of us, we're doing great. You know, we were just, you know, telling stories about my dad. You know, and that's just the way we handle death. We try to handle it in a positive way. But then again, my mother was a nurse, and she'd been dealing with all of this stuff for you know, decades. She was a nurse for 70 years. So 25% of the bereaved adults still had emotional problems 1 to 5 years after the death of their parents. This included sadness, depression, thoughts of suicide. 50% continued to have physical reactions to the form of illness, fatigue, and general decline in health. And that hasn't happened to my family. My mother and father definitely wouldn't have wanted us to get sick just because they weren't around anymore. Euthanasia is the act of allowing or assisting someone to die. Euthanasia has been practiced in the United States for decades. Doctors who have wanted to stop the pain and suffering of a terminal patient would merely stop making overt attempts to keep them alive. Withholding or discontinuing life-sustaining treatment is known as passive euthanasia. Dr. Jack Kevorkian, however, actively assisted people in seeking their deaths, and this is known as assisted suicide. So the medical community is not cruel. We don't force people to stay in pain for an extended length of time. A lot of times, passive euthanasia is what happens. Even before Erickson, people tended to review their lives before they died. This is referred to by thanatologists as a life review. Life reviews seem to be beneficial for all people, but especially those who look back and saw a true purpose in their lives. These tended to be the people who feared death the least. And of course, if I look back on my life, I've been a teacher and I worked in medicine. I've saved a lot of lives. I've helped a lot of people, and I forget all the bad anything bad that I might have had something to do with. There's not that much in my life that is that way. Ritual is important for Hinduism, which includes bathing the body with holy water and draped with white cloth, sprinkling rice on the mouth, cremation with only men present. Ashes are scattered on the 31st day. A memorial service is held on the 31st day. This is not, there's no dead people in this picture, okay? Buddhism rituals include presence of monks is very important. because the monks are going to be praying, and they pray for a select amount of time, depending on which sect of Buddhism you're dealing with, how long they pray. So the monks need to be there. Bathing ceremony after death, cremation, feast held on the day of cremation, continual prayers performed by monks. This is this person hasn't been created. It looks like they're going to bury this guy, but it's common to, and that's a government cemetery. So they're burying him in a casket. They're not cremating. They haven't cremated him, and his ashes are in the casket. That's not the way it works. I've worked in military cemeteries before. Anyway, that's not what's happening here. But this is a Buddhist cemetery or funeral. Judaism tends to have a community of volunteers. Body is washed and purified. Body is dried and wrapped in linen. The family members enter 7-day mourning. It's a 7-day mourning period followed by a second 30-day period. The coffin can have no nails and no handles, nothing metal in the coffin, or they can't. They don't. Jewish people don't believe in heaven or hell, but they can't. They can't be peaceful. The idea is that if there's metal in the coffin or metal anywhere where they are buried, that it will stick them. It'll punish them. Two major mourning traditions in Christianity: Catholics anoint the sick before they die, followed by a vigil and a requiem mass is held. Protestants may have a funeral service which includes a eulogy. Protestant tradition is less ritualized than Catholic tradition, and of course there are hundreds of denominations of Protestants. Islamic rituals include gathering near the deathbed, reciting the Quran. The body is bathed and burial takes place shortly after death. It's the same way with Jewish individuals have to be buried before sundown the next day. So when somebody dies, they have to be buried before the next day. And it's the same way in Islam. If somebody dies, they have to be buried within a day. Cremation is forbidden. The body laid on the right side facing Mecca. 3-day mourning period with wives, mourning for 4 months and 10 days. And those are the rituals of all the major religions. Hindu, this is remembering and honoring the dead. The Hindus, a year anniversary of the death of the deceased. The favorite food is prepared. That's in the Hindu religion. Buddhist, the ancestors, they worship the ancestors. So if you're Korean and you have lost somebody, and somebody has died, then they are buried in the family plot. Actually, they cremate all their dead. So they are the ashes are put in there with all the rest of their ancestors. And once a year, they have everybody goes to the cemeteries, to their family plot, and they have a big festival. They have a big feed, and it's all everybody does it at the same time. I can't think of what it's called. It's a real mess because if you live in Seoul and your family plot is 250 miles away, you have to travel there and get there on the right day in order to have this festival. And if you don't do it, you're insulting your ancestors and whatnot. It gets really strange if the family plot's in Hawaii and your family lives in Japan. They have to make that. Well, doesn't make any sense. If somebody lives in Hawaii and their family plots in Japan, Buddhist ancestor worship. Jewish Yahrzeit candles are lit for 24 hours and prayer recited 3 times. The Christian have a 3-day period called All Hallows Eve. That's right around Halloween. Muslims visit graves, they show respect, and they offer prayers. And that is the end of the chapter. So that's it. This is the last chapter. There will be one more quiz. Get everything in. Don't forget your paper. Get it in before May. That would be great. What is today? The 8th, the 9th, 10th. Today's the 10th. Okay. So, okay. Thank you. I've had it's been an interesting semester with all the email and Blackboard going down from time to time. Just get everything in. I don't count off for late work. So thank you for being in my class. I had a good time.